Welcome to my YouTube channel, Truth Emotion Studios. Today I am speaking again with Kelsey Hoff, Canadian therapist and personal friend of mine now. Very happy to have you again, Kelsey. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks so much for having me again. This is really fun.
Awesome. We want to discuss the topic of undue influence today. That's a topic you usually hear about with elderly people or with disabled people in vulnerable positions where some vicious people find ways to take advantage of them, and usually there's some kind of monetary scheme involved. People want to enrich themselves, and that's actually a felony in the United States. So what we're talking about is undue influence in the context of spiritual settings. And I want to wager that undue influence is a symptom of spiritual abuse. So Kelsey, being a therapist, I will begin by laying out my personal case, how it was for me when I first got into my group and got radicalized there. I began to hang out with these people, and they really were interested in me. And I told them a lot about myself. Now, my father, I remember this because it never happened before and it never happened again after, told me as a feedback that when I was visiting them at home, that he thought that I was going in a good direction. So after spending a few months with these people in my town where I went to college and talked to them, listened to their thoughts, prayed with them, changed my thinking in very practical ways, like for instance, food related, nutrition related, made changes. It was very palpable. So that prompted my dad to say to me, he thinks I'm on a good path. And back then that felt wonderful. And then it ended up feeling awful because I realized not only was his judgment wrong, my judgment was wrong too. Or I should have left right around that time when it was like, yep, some things are coming together, others don't. Well, but neither of us were the wiser. So what my dad thought was a good thing would look, for instance, like this. I quit watching TV because I was told that I was some kind of a prophet, and prophets don't watch media. So you don't go to the movie theater, you don't watch movies, no TV, no radio, nothing, no outside influence. So I quit doing that. And then of course drinking was a huge thing. My cult leader is actually, I believe, an alcoholic, and well, I guess what they would call a functioning alcoholic, but he certainly goes all out and needs people to drive him all the time. And he has these extreme, insane states. So drinking was always a topic. He would make everybody fast with him, though he never, admitted that he had a problem. But so I quit drinking too, which was certainly good for me too. And so those are already pretty big changes to make as a 22-year-old, or what was that, 23 or so. And the first time someone gave me a feedback that something is off was a very good friend of mine whom I would visit by train, and I would stay the weekend usually, and we would watch Gilmore Girls and drink wine and just have a fabulous girl time. I told her beforehand that I wasn't going to be able to watch the show with her and I wasn't going to be able to drink anything. So she asked me not to come.
Wow.
And that was one of the first, not everybody is excited like I am.
Right. When you think back to the early days of getting to know that group of people, what were you attracted to?
Ooh, it was twofold. And I'm being honest to God. The first thing was that I thought that God had told me that I was to marry the co-leader, that was my future husband. I was one of those girls that deeply, desperately wanted a partner, a husband, a savior. And so I saw the co-leader speak at a Baptist church, and I had don't know, felt like an epiphany. I wrote a song about it. It was that intense. Well, I don't know what I saw, but in my mind, I saw arrows over him, and I was supposed to stick to him. Now, through him, I met my husband. Maybe that's what God was saying. I don't know. But bright blinking arrows. That's the name of the song. Well, so that was one thing. So I stuck with them because I thought I was going to marry him. Number two, the topics were so interesting. It was a lot about self-actualization, I guess. I think I've mentioned this before. The main leader is a psychology professional. Okay. So he would mix faith and psychology, and it was kind of self-help, right? Very reflective, and both those topics, getting married and self-actualization, becoming the person you're meant to be for God, with the power of the Holy Spirit that I, as a Baptist, hadn't heard anything before. Those concepts were very attractive to me.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you can see that made you vulnerable to that type of teaching?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, vulnerable. I was for sure a vulnerable person. Mental health had been kind of a problem for me. I was not mentally well, and had, before I came to that town, actually spent 3 months in a inpatient treatment. And so going to this town now, going to college there, was certainly a risky move. What I think should have had been done beforehand was that whoever the counselors were from that clinic, they should have made sure that I have someone to go to in that town. But I remember calling around, because as soon as school started, I would be suicidal again and just kind of feel very alone, and the usual spirals in my head were sounding again and taking me down to dark places. And but I was told, you have to wait for half a year or so before you can get into with a therapist in the area. And so that made me very vulnerable. Yes. And then on top of that, I have also always thought that I was going to be an awesome, super special person. Like, I don't know where that's coming from, but I always thought that was going to be my future. And so these people telling me that that was my future.
Right. It's kind of like, oh yeah, I've always known that, and this is it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Wow. So as you got to know them more, and as you kind of got more seeped into this group, what was that first sign that made you think, maybe this isn't everything I had thought it was? Or maybe maybe they have more influence than they should in my life.
That I don't think that I ever thought that, really. Okay. I may have thought something like, this is not so good, but the language, even, they have influence on me and it's too much. I was not able to even think that. And that is a recurring topic in my life. I remember being in first grade and my 1-year-old older sister telling me that the kids in school take advantage of me, that there were some girls that I so badly wanted to be friends with. And I had given them some of my toys out of desperation. And so she saw that and she told me, they're taking advantage of you. And I didn't understand a word of what she was saying. It's just something, I think I was raised in a helplessness. I was the youngest, and my sister always told me what to do, and my father was very authoritative, and I already thought for myself.
Yeah.
So, but certainly what you were saying, there were red flags. I think the first red flag was that after we had already spent months together, that was really, for me, very intimate and powerful and life-changing, because I felt they helped me connect with God more. Then I had to go back and live in my parents' town, because I had set up an internship at a school. And I really regretted that then. But then for this month that I was there, just a few days in, I was already ready to kill myself, because with my parents, I just didn't get along. And just being away from the people that I had felt so awesome with, caused that. And they didn't reach out to me at all. There wasn't any text messages or emails. And so this is the funny thing, when usually, well, later it developed to I couldn't do anything without getting a phone call or a text message. Back then, I wanted that, and they were able to, I don't know why, maybe they didn't think of me as an integral part of the group yet, but I remember then eventually calling one of actually the co-leader, and telling him that I'm having a really bad time and I'm sad that they haven't reached out. And he apologized. And so I thought that was awesome. So yeah, that was how that developed.
Isn't it interesting how it seems like you were really looking for connection somewhere, and they really provided that connection that you were looking for, and you were away from home and on your own and figuring out life outside of the supports that you were used to, and of course that appealed to you at that time.
And then I would say, when I was told to break off contact to specific people, that's certainly when I realized this is getting very painful. But by then, I had already bought so much into the message of obedience to us is obedience to God. And I'd seen people rebel against that, and how embarrassing, and how they would either then repent, and if they had just been obedient, in the first round, then they could have saved themselves that embarrassment. So, or they were kicked out. I didn't want either. I didn't want to be embarrassed of myself, and I didn't want to be kicked out. So I just learned to become obedient, and that was undue influence. That led to me also giving lots of money into their care. I was not able to see that.
Wow. And what brought you to see it?
It's a very good question.
Because that's a challenging part of working with people who are under undue influence, that they don't see it.
Yeah.
And so what kind of took that veil off for you?
Last time we talked, I mentioned this year 2009. That was an insane year for me personally. But what happened, besides all the biographical things for me, like graduating and getting married and all that, was that I saw so much more of what they were like. And they would make prophecies, and then we would act upon those prophecies. And then we would say, oh, you've prophesied this, so we've done this. We've, like, the leader prophesied that so many beggars, homeless people would show up the next day for a brunch. And we went out to the streets and invited people and talked to them that night. And next day we would get yelled at for doing that. And the leader had to, in the spirit, bind that anyone would show up, and nobody showed up. So it must have worked. But so experiences like that are just insane. They accumulated over the time, and I could not let that slide so easily anymore. It just really got to me, to this, wow, this man says he loves me, but what my life is actually like, and the trouble I'm left to fix after being obedient to him, is that doesn't add up. So that is as far as I was able to think. It took me probably like the next year after. That's when I started, after reading The Subtle Power of Spiritual Use. That's when I was able to really look at it as what my mother was trying to tell me in this time all along. It was slavish obedience that was expected. And she had her own stories that she was telling me from people she knew. And I would listen to those stories and be like, yeah, that's awful for those people, but that's not my group. My people are really the chosen ones from God. And so I mentioned last time that I had not gone to my sister's wedding, which is a huge deal. Like for the leader, it was just like, whoa, he didn't see the consequence that would cause, or he didn't care, both. But for my family, that was huge. And my mom, after I was out of the group, when I was visiting, brought it up and said something like, don't you think that was leadership failure? And even then, I still defended them, saying, no, they were trying to do the right thing, something like that. They were trying to discern what God was wanting from me. And so even being out of the group, I don't remember exactly when that conversation happened, but it was in my memory, very clear that I was not able to call it what it was.
Yeah.
But after learning about spiritual reviews, that's when my eyes came open.
Wow. That's so true, that education is so important to kind of protect yourself from these dynamics.
Yes.
Yeah.
I like to think of, I mean, not that I enjoy thinking of it, but when the US Olympics team, the girls, came out with their stories of sexual abuse by their gynecologist.
Gymnast?
Yes.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a correlation to they underwent treatment, and they didn't probably know while it was happening, probably felt embarrassed, ashamed, didn't like it, were wondering what's going on here, but trusting. So clearly in a vulnerable position. So I feel like that is what I liken this to. I went through this all with open eyes, but I told myself these people are trustworthy, God is trustworthy. And this is all good.
Yeah. Well, and in the gymnast case, everyone's saying that this is the best doctor. He's going to help you fulfill your dreams of going to the Olympics. Everyone trusts him. He's been here for so long. But
what an incredible amount of pressure, and what a opportunity for a really evil person to abuse the situation.
Yeah. Makes me think about how unhealthy it is to put people on pedestals like that they can't be questioned, or they're this person with this level of respect worldwide, or the current Ravi Zacharias scandal. His word was seen as like, he says that he's covered, and so that's the word. But then we learned that isn't the way it works, and we need to avoid pedestals like that, and kind of giving people a free, they don't need to be questioned because they're so above reproach, or they're so, you can spiritualize it or not spiritualize it. It can go either way. This can happen as a result of a spiritual community, or it can be like a place like Olympic gymnastics.
Yeah, same dynamic though, and you're absolutely right. That is a red flag always to keep in mind. If someone says they are beyond being questioned, they can't be bothered with that, or you asking questions outs you as a problematic, rebellious person.
You're the problem because you're bothered by this. So you just need to chill out, right?
Yes.
Have you experienced that?
Oh, totally.
I have too. Yeah. So you just need to get over it, because look, everyone else is okay with it. So it's obviously you that's the problem.
Right. Yeah. And what is your problem with the Lord having an anointed one that deserves special treatment, so he can focus on doing the Lord's work, and you're just bothering him with that stuff?
He's so special. Yeah.
Awful. Yes. Yeah. So this is a common thread. Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Wow.
So how did you get out of that influence? You realized that there was undue influence, and something needed to happen.
Yeah. it didn't look like it was ever going to happen. Eventually we got kicked out. And I think even that was an attempt to rail us back in, because it is so crushing to have that rug pulled from under you. And that is not what we decided to do, though. Thankfully, I was with James then, and we had been married for, I don't know, a few weeks. Yeah, but like I said, the influence part, where I at least could say, wow, these were bad people. It's not that I failed them. They were really nasty, without conscience, without empathy, using people. And then the next step was years even after that, wow, the theology in itself is abusive. But yeah, that was another step. So the influence part really came in these small layers of, but as soon as I understood spiritual abuse, it was like, bam, of course they could tell me to do anything. I would have done anything for them.
Yeah.
They were like God in my life. Obedience to them was obedience to God, and I wanted to be obedient to God.
Yeah. When I've worked with clients in some of the dynamics related to undue influence on the other side, so when they're out of it and kind of reflecting more on that experience, shame and embarrassment is often present, of like how, because we all kind of hold ourselves in this, oh, I wouldn't fall for that, right? But then looking back and saying I did, and getting scammed, or having that sense that someone actually took advantage of my vulnerability and I didn't realize it at the time. What was that experience like for you?
Yeah. I actually have fallen for scammers.
Yeah, I have too.
Yeah.
I had a, yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, no, I bought a phone that doesn't work. So not like a major scam, like, but I just gave someone on the street a couple $100, and now I have a useless phone.
And what a story to tell.
It's super frustrating. But it's a small example. But yeah, we're all, this isn't something that is only happens to like 19-year-olds when they're out of the house for the first time. And like, yeah.
Right. You're absolutely right. There's this show, Just Pete, I believe it's called, on Amazon. And that is about a con man and how he's trying to survive, and his ability to give people the promise of what they're looking for is really what makes him, function, and gives him the success he needs, because he just can't get out of the hands of people that are loose with the law. Yeah. So, but that show taught me a lot about that we're all vulnerable. We all have something. And that's really up to us to think about, what is it that we're secretly hoping for? Save a few bucks,
right?
Or, like some kind of an advantage. Yeah. And for me, like you said earlier, having meaningful connection was such a need that I was starved for, that where I went to college first, I went to a different city before. That's kind of where my life fell apart. But one of the first persons that I talked to in that first college town that I went to was a girl that I loved her. I mean, she was the girlfriend, or my soulmate friend that I thought I needed. And it turned out she was a pathological liar, and she disappeared. I've never seen her again. After knowing her for maybe half a year or so, we were going to move together, and I knew everything about her, I thought. But thankfully, she had introduced me because of her boyfriend lived in the town, so her ex-boyfriend, and he worked at a certain bar. I ended up working at that bar. So she vanished, and I was able to talk with him about her. And then I realized everything she told me. Her dad was supposedly dead. She was supposedly the super bulimic girl that she had just stories. And I believed everything, because I wanted her to be my friend. I didn't want to feel alone. So that was that. And then I fell for it, like you. I gave someone €50 to buy a TV that they never brought me. So I'm feeling I'm answering your question, but now I kind of forgot the question you asked. Basically, how did that feel like for me to realize the undue influence? It felt like a recurring topic in my life, and I was tired of it. I wasn't so much ashamed of it. I was more very disgusted that I had passed on so much hurt as a foot soldier for these people. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So what advice would you give people for seeing it, for one thing, but also on the other side? I guess we could maybe split it up for like for someone if they're sensing that they might be under undue influence, how can they know? And like what are the signs? And what can they be asking themselves?
Yeah. I think one good question is, what would happen if I don't do what they tell me to do? What bad consequences am I trying to avoid? Because you've learned to be obedient for whatever reason, like to please God, to not fall in God's bad graces or something. So what could happen if you don't do what they say? And then I would say, you know what? Test it.
Right.
Just pick something and just say, I'm not available that day, or I can't give you that money this time. What happens next?
Yeah.
And then take that very seriously, how they handle you putting up any kind of boundary. That's one thing.
Yeah.
What do you think? What would you give for advice?
Something that comes up is be aware of situations that seem too good to be true. You know, those situations are like those people who seem too good to be true. Like they are so perfect, or they care for me so much, or they, you know, are so caring and so compassionate. There's nothing wrong.
Yeah.
Everyone has a mixture, and so that it's something I have to ask myself, is this too good to be true because it actually is?
Yeah.
You know, so when I bought that cell phone, it was too good to be true. It was too cheap of a cell phone, right? So I should have asked myself, why is the cell phone so cheap? You know, and does it make sense for it to be that cheap? That's just a small example, but I guess in life, I encourage people to recognize when things just feel so good, and that's not necessarily mean that it's always all bad, but look for that balance. You know, if someone wants to be part of every single part of your life, why might they want to know every single part of your life? Is that a balanced friendship, or is there something going on for them that actually maybe they have some sort of thing themselves that makes them want to control people to be inside every part of their life? And I'm not saying that to tell people not to allow, you know, friendships or people into their life, but to also recognize that there's a concept of earned trust and earned responsibility towards someone, and that takes time. And so another piece of advice I think I would tell people would be to that time is your friend. You know, you don't need to jump on the first bandwagon that comes along, and it's okay to say, I will dabble in these friendships but not share all of myself with them and see what happens. And as trust is built, then you can share more or participate more. But you're your own person, and you're allowed to pick and choose. So then I guess along with that also, do you have autonomy to pick and choose? You know, can you say, I will be friends with you to this point, but beyond that, I'm not comfortable. And a healthy friendship would be okay with that. What do you think?
Definitely. It's very simple. Can you say yes? Can you say no?
Yeah.
Acceptable, or will it be argued with? Absolutely. Those
Yeah.
very simple boundaries. Yes.
Yeah. If you set a boundary saying, I don't know, maybe you don't want to talk about certain parts of your life yet.
Mhm.
Can you say, I'm not ready to talk about that?
Mhm.
And will they respect that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or if you say, I can't come to that thing because I really have already other plans, are
Mhm.
they making you cancel them?
Right.
Do
Yeah.
do they guilt you? And I think that's what you're saying, and that's what I'm saying is realize that there are dynamics that are universal, and the dynamic of people trying to control you, little or big ways,
Mhm.
that's just unfortunate a thing in the world. That I was too blue-eyed. I had no idea about. Do you say that in English? Blue-eyed,
Yeah,
rose-colored.
bushy tail and blue-eyed and bushy tail.
Yeah, well, that it was supposed to be rose-colored glasses. Like
Yeah.
that was it. I didn't think that people would be so mean, and especially not in a faith setting, because I
Mhm.
thought they had earned my trust with
Right.
knowing the Lord better than I did, with knowing things about me, supposedly.
Right.
Supposedly, that's the thing. I was so easily plucked because I was so needy.
Yeah.
To be in touch with your weakness, with your need, I think is another way to protect yourself.
Yeah. So in spiritual communities where spirituality is also a part of the dynamic, how is that is it do you can you offer any advice that is specific to when they're quoting scripture or when they're saying
Mm,
things
yeah,
about spiritual authority or accountability
mm,
or that
yeah,
type of
yeah. Or the trump card, obedience to us is obedience to God. Not obeying us is not obeying God. And
yeah.
Jesus says that that's the whole point, that the people would obey his word. So, what is his word? That's for those spiritual authorities to tell you what the word is that you have to obey to. So, I'm laying this out to say, look for traps. That
Mhm.
is a trap. If you swallow that, just think about that. If you swallow that, that if you don't believe what a person says, and they use this Bible verse where Jesus says very clearly,
Mhm.
that's the one thing you're supposed to obey my word. That's how you prove that you love me and I'm in you and you and me and all that. Then think about that. Should a human being have that much power over you? Can is that safe? Is that like nobody's perfect? That's what they always say, right? The pastor is not perfect, or the spiritual leader, they're just humans. But do they know that that they're not perfect? That they're and then they will say, if I'm making a mistake, God will still bless you for your obedience
Mhm.
because you trusted into the process of obedience. And I'm telling you, that is not true. God allows you to experience a lot of the consequences, broken relationships, hurt people, money lost, whatever, opportunities gone. That is part of the grace of God, that we have that free will. And if we give our trust to people to be the mediator between us and God, you are setting yourself up for damage. It's one thing to have a trusted person that you can go to and they will honor your autonomy. They will honor your ability to make choices. They will tell you their opinion. They have earned that trust, but it's a completely different thing if someone maybe gradually but clearly establishes themselves as this end all, the buck stops here.
Right.
Disobedience to me is disobedience to God person. That is for me such a red flag. There's no reason whatsoever to pay any attention to what that person has to say.
And even someone who has earned your trust,
Mhm.
if they're worth your trust, they would say, this is my perspective, this is my feedback, but you are your own person and you're responsible for yourself.
Yeah, they would say that.
Yeah. And they wouldn't take it as we are the authority of you.
Yeah,
Um, yeah.
yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. And then once you get out of all that, you have so much damage to clean up.
Mm.
And again, I wasn't ashamed. I was sad that I had caused so much damage with my rose-colored glasses, that I really can only say, knowing these things. That's why I brought up the gymnasts. Knowing what is healthy,
Mhm.
mentorship, what is healthy dynamics, and knowing what is not is going to be so helpful in discerning.
Yeah. Good. Well, I'm glad that we could have this conversation to talk about some of these. I hope
Yep.
it's helpful to people who watch
Yes.
to identify whether these are some of the dynamics in their own relationships, or maybe be able to understand some past dynamics in a different way as well.
Yeah. I think the one thing I wanted to still ask you is, what would you advise a person who is concerned for someone else?
Great question.
They are under undue influence.
It's hard because you can't just convince someone. You know, I imagine you said that your mom pointed it out, and you're kind of in it. You're blinded. Yeah, it's hard. I would say I don't have a formula of this is how you convince someone, but just I would say consistently pointing out what you observe. You know, don't get into big debates with someone who you're concerned for, but still be someone who observes and gives feedback and lets it be there. And I also really recommend try to continue to be in good relationship with that person. You know, it might be easy to, or you might be likely to, or that relationship is vulnerable because you see something and they don't, right? And they, that could actually have a negative effect on your relationship with that person. But continue to really invest in that person that you see is under undue influence, because they are going to need you once they see that is the reality. It's hard. It's really tough, but be consistent, be thoughtful, ask good questions. That's another thing. Asking good questions and being really curious. So it can be really easy just to kind of attack and say, that's ridiculous. How can you be part of that? It's a cult, or, you know, that doesn't typically work in convincing someone. But being curious and really exploring why they think that that's a beneficial influence to be under, and maybe what effect that has on them. And I'm not saying that's going to be a magical cure and they're going to see it right away, but just like how learning about these dynamics helps, hearing other people's stories helps. Also, having someone who sees the world differently ask you about your life helps, right? Because they're asking you questions that probably no one else is asking. So keep asking questions and keep being curious, and being consistent in your friendship with that person. I would say those are my advice things. How about you? Do you have anything to add to that?
What comes to mind is it goes along with what you're saying. When you ask questions and help the person reflect on what is happening, if they even dare to tell you honestly, it is a form of a reality check. And what often happens in these relationships, in these unhealthy relationships, is this gaslighting. They tell you, well, it might feel like I'm making you give me $50, but in reality, I am helping you do the Lord's work. So that's gaslighting.
Right.
And when you tell a person, well, they convinced me that I need to give, or no, the Lord wants me to give them $50. When you hear yourself say that and see another person's reaction to that, that could be helpful in just a reality check.
Right.
It could also send you away from that person. So I would always say, be careful with how strong you react. That could be the thing that pushes them over the edge. I was eventually not allowed to talk to people that would question the leaders. That itself should have been a red flag. But again, I was under undue influence. I didn't know. And then the other part is a power struggle. People that try to convince you, well, they try to influence you that you're under undue influence. You're now in a power struggle with the controller, and you want to be the controller. You want to tell them, what they should do. You should go away from that person. Don't have anything to do with them. So now you are the contending control voice, and that's tricky. I don't think that can be successful, or that way you're not building a person's autonomy or ability to see the reality. So like you said earlier, by forcing yourself on them with your opinion, your perspective, that's bound to lead to you probably being pushed away, or even be like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because often the people that I wasn't allowed to be with was because that's what they said. They're trying to control you. So if they would come and say, yeah, why, then I would report that back to the leaders, and then they would say, see, we told you. They don't understand what God is doing here. So
right. It kind of becomes a persecution complex.
Yep, everybody's
persecuted. Yeah,
the witch hunt. They're trying to hurt us. They're trying to hurt the Lord. Yes, and then demonizing starts, and then you can only have contact with certain people, and yeah. So it's I think it's helpful for the person that is concerned to be aware that these people are meeting a need that person has, and to take that seriously, and to maybe help that person realize what is that need that you're thinking is being met here, and then respect that, and then think of ways that maybe you can help them find other ways to get that need met. And that this is something my dad apparently always said, but I was always so afraid of my dad that I don't think I remember him ever saying that. But he just recently repeated that to me, saying, I've always told you, don't listen to anyone who scares you. Like I said, I was too afraid of my authoritative dad to hear that, like with an open mind, and be like, whoa, that's really good advice. Yeah. But it is good advice. Do not let someone scare you. Those are Jesus's words, and my father didn't even say it on behalf of Jesus. He said it as common sense. Don't believe someone that scares you. Don't do what they say. This is how marketing works. When you're ready to check out at an online shop, and then suddenly like, oh, here is the timer. You have 2 minutes to decide to get this at a discount. That's so smart, but it is so vicious, because you're being coerced into acting against your free will, because fear is suddenly in the mix. And so to be very aware of people trying to scare you and manipulate you that way, I think is a dead giveaway.
Great advice. Love it.
Hard, painfully earned, and yet now we can talk about it and hopefully help others in their situations. So thank you so much, Kelsey, for your time.
Really fun. Thanks for this.